Hey, everybody, this is Skylar Zander, the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Florida. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. We have an extra special guest, Congressman Greg Steube. Congressman Steube had an incredible law career down in the Manatee County, Sarasota County area. He currently represents Congressional District 17 in the U.S. Congress. Prior to that, he served in the Florida legislature, both as a state senator and a state representative. So he knows what it's like to go from a body of collaboration to, some might call it a body of dysfunction right now. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, Congressman, there's a lot going on in DC right now, obviously a lot of noise, and we're excited to have you on to tell our activists about HB1 in particular. So instead of prioritizing COVID relief or any other type of issues that actually deal with the pandemic that we're in, it seems as though Speaker Pelosi has prioritized House Bill 1, which essentially overtakes all of state-based election laws. It makes sure it basically takes all the power and puts it into Congress. It gets rid of a nonpartisan FEC to where it would be controlled by the president of whoever's in charge of whichever party is in charge. It would get rid of the opportunity for C4s and C3s like us to be able to effectively communicate with you as a congressional member and other congressional members. What are your overall thoughts on HB1?
Yeah, it's such a big bill. What I'd like to do is just kind of talk through just some kind of bullet points, the top 10 most egregious parts of the bill. And then if you want to dive in deeper, we can do that because there's so many things in this that I think would be offensive, regardless of your political affiliation, would be completely offensive to you as an American, of the complete federal takeover that would happen of our campaigns at the federal level. The first thing that I would think would be atrocious to just about anybody is, for the first time in the history of our country, it allows taxpayer funding to go to congressional campaigns. Up to $200 would be matched by a 6-to-1 match. So you would get $1,200 from the federal government if somebody gave you $200 for every single person that gave you up to $200. So think about the millions and probably billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars that would go towards political campaigns of people that you don't support. So if you're a Democrat, you probably don't want the federal government giving me money in campaign contributions out of your tax dollars and vice versa. So it actually does a 6-to-1 match on small donations up to $200 based on that person. So $1,200 a person. So we are looking at millions, maybe even billions of dollars of your tax dollars that would go to political campaigns. And I can't think for the life of me that many people out there would feel comfortable or want their tax dollars going to fund political ads attacking individuals that they may or may not support. And what you also mentioned,
it's as though Congress isn't spending enough as it is. I mean, it's just been billions on campaigning is just so egregious.
Yeah, and it was done this way too. Obviously, Democrats are stronger in small dollar donations. That's a fact. You can look that up than Republicans are. So it's helping Democrats by those small dollar donations because it's getting campaign or taxpayer dollars to match that on a 6-to-1 match. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And there wasn't any talk in the mainstream media about that being in the bill. And when I talk about that back in the district or talk to people, I don't know anybody that would actually support taxpayer dollars going to political campaigns. The other piece of it, and there's multiple pieces, but one of the other more egregious pieces that you had mentioned was a complete federalization of our campaigns. The U.S. Constitution is abundantly clear, and I'll read the article. It's Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution empowers the states to determine, and I quote, the times, places, and manner of holding elections. What this bill would do is nullify state election laws, and it would make significant strides in stripping states of their power. And one of the things that they do in stripping states of that power is they mandate universal mail-in ballots and mandate the abolition of voter ID laws in the 27 states in our country, including Florida, the state I represent, would abolish them. So a federal takeover of elections in the clear violation of our United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, that states that the state legislatures determine the time, manner, and places of elections that occur in their states. And the framers did that purposely because they didn't want the federal government to overtake the decisions that was happening on campaigns. They wanted those decisions pushed down to the state and the state legislature. So this clearly would violate that part of our U.S. Constitution. So it completely nationalizes that and then strips states like Florida, who have voter ID laws, it would take them away. It also, well, I kind of touched on this, it imposes liberal voting methods on every state. So it would permanently expand mail-in voting, legalize ballot harvesting, and disregard voter ID laws. So not only would it do away with states like Florida's voter ID laws that require you to present some type of identification in order to get registered to vote, it would also mandate mail-in ballots. So we saw all those problems in states like Georgia, which their legislature has just changed those laws, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in the last presidential election. It would mandate what occurred in those states nationwide. There would be no verification on the back end for mail-in ballots. So you wouldn't know if these ballots are coming from somebody that's a legitimate citizen of our country who's registered to vote in the state of Florida. You wouldn't know where they're coming from. So that's one of the other things that it does. It also weaponizes the Federal Election Commission. It makes an election commission that right now is balanced Republican and Democrat, and it weaponizes it. It alters the current bipartisan makeup of the 6-member commission to a partisan 5-member commission and establishes a speech czar, limiting free speech and creating a partisan commission. So for those of you out there that feel very strongly about the First Amendment of the Constitution, it's going to actually start limiting speech in the political realm, which, if you know anything about the U.S. Supreme Court and the history of laws as it relates to political speech is the most protected speech in our country under the First Amendment to the Constitution.
And that's something that I think is easy for Democrats and Republicans alike, and even independents, to agree that we shouldn't have a quote unquote free speech czar, and we shouldn't be weaponizing the FEC, regardless of who is in power. The FEC is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's supposed to take a look at these issues, each individual one that comes before them, and make a nonpartisan ruling. That way it does its best to try to make sure that our foundation, our democratic foundation, is done in the most effective and efficient way that's fair. And I mean, look, we have 50 different states, like you said earlier, to just completely overtake it. The issues that we deal with in Florida are nothing like issues that are dealt with from an election standpoint in California and Oregon, and it should stay that way.
Yeah, and this would completely do away with the whole crux of our federalist system of government and do away with states' rights as it relates to election laws. Related to the First Amendment issue is the standards that would disadvantage all groups, and you kind of touched on this too with C4s. It specifically requires them to disclose the names of donors who donate above a certain threshold. So C4s like Americans for Prosperity would find it very difficult to get donors to then communicate on whatever it is that the C4 wants to communicate, because now all of that information would be public to everybody.
And you know what's interesting about that, Congressman, that a lot of people don't really focus or know of how that came about originally was because of the NAACP. You know, they had donors that were donating to them in Alabama in particular to try to fight back against some of the Jim Crow laws and some of these other extreme laws. And they wanted to make sure that their donors were protected. They wanted to make sure that they could be able to advocate for civil rights and not have to worry about stores being burned, people being killed in many instances. And that's where that law comes from. So, you know, it's whether it's lawsuits that are going through the court right now, you see a lot of folks like the NAACP engaged with us in particular on fighting back against those type of roles. I mean, it's just, you know, a lot of people like to just blanketly say that it's dark money or this is great, but really, at the end of the day, this all came, this law basically allowing C4s to be able to have political speech came out of the civil rights era.
Yeah, that's a very good point. One of the other provisions that I think is very demonstrative to what the Democrats and the majority is trying to do is it removes states' ability to decide how their districts are drawn. So right now, and I'll just talk about the state of Florida, for example, in the state of Florida, our constitution in the state, so the Florida Constitution states specifically that the state legislature shall draw the redistricting maps, both for the state house, state senate, and also the congressional seats. That is 100% back to Article 1, Section 4 of the US Constitution of the state's legislature's ability under the Constitution to determine times, manner, and places of election law. It also, in Florida and other states, or several other states that do it the same way, the state decides how they're going to redraw their congressional districts, because the state should be determining how their state house and state senate and state congressional seats are redistricted. And what this bill would do is it would mandate the use of independent redistricting commissions for creating congressional districts, removing states' flexibility to choose the best systems and needs for their citizens. Now, saying independent redistricting commissions sounds great because you think that all these people are independent and free from political influence. But what we've seen in states that do have these type of commissions is they're appointed by governors or they're appointed by different political individuals, and they have political mandates just because they're independent and not elected. I believe, just like the framers believe, you elected us, you elected your state legislators, your state house and state senators to make decisions that affect the state of Florida or whatever state it is that you live in. And so they are best to determine how to do redistricting, to draw those lines pursuant to the constitutional mandates that have been set out, because every 2 years they're up for re-election. And if they've done something that violates the confines of the US Constitution, the state constitution, they can be held accountable. People that are appointed for 6, 8, 10-year terms on independent commissions don't have that same accountability with the people. And again, the framers were very smart in how they put all these things together. They knew that, one, the state should have their own determinations to decide what's best for the states, and that the people would have the power by electing those individuals who would serve in those positions.
I mean, I think you said it best. I mean, people already have the ability, states already have the ability to have independent commissions if they choose to. And so it should be left up to the individual states. And like you said, we shouldn't be violating our Constitution.
Well, and one of the last things I'll hit on are probably the 10 most offensive things that are in this is it weaponizes the IRS, which is obviously under the confines of whatever administration, whoever the president is at the time. And it permits the agency to investigate and consider the political and policy persuasions of organizations before granting tax exempt status. I think it's very, very dangerous to be going down a road where the administration is going to make a determination politically based on whether you should have tax exempt status or not. We should follow the law. It should be a legal standard, a judicial standard, and not a political standard that now one party or the other's administration is going to be determining who gets tax exempt status and who doesn't. And that's also in this huge bill.
Yeah, we've never seen the IRS weaponized, have we?
Yeah, exactly. There's history there that shows that's not a good idea.
Absolutely. Congressman, why don't you dive in a little bit deeper? You know, what are, I mean, you just said 10 really concerning things. Right now, the bill went through the process basically without any markups during the 117th Congress, and it's already been sent over to the Senate. Talk about some of the dangers. I mean, you didn't even get a chance to voice your opinion on it, except for when it hit the House floor.
Well, and I think that's a great point for people to understand too. There's obviously some substantive things here that are very, in my opinion, dangerous for America and dangerous for our nation. But the sheer process in which it became to be passed in the House is further demonstrative of the issues that are in this bill. So typically a bill gets filed by a member. Obviously, sometimes leadership can file bills too, and they get referenced to committees. I sit on the Judiciary Committee, which this bill would have gone through had it gone through the committee process. So after a bill gets referred to certain committees, it goes to that committee for a markup. So every single member of Congress that sits on the Judiciary Committee, Republican and Democrat, have the opportunity to mark up a bill and amend it, propose amendments to the bill, work the bill through the legislative process, which is why we are all elected, to go up there and represent our districts and our unique districts' persuasion on what they think that bill should represent. And it would go through probably multiple committees, but at least the one Judiciary Committee that deals with the First Amendment and elections and those type of issues that come through the purview of that committee. It didn't happen that way in this instance. What happened was this bill was drafted in secret in the Speaker's office. It came straight out, didn't go to a single committee. Not one committee had the opportunity to amend or mark up this piece of legislation. It went straight to the floor, where the Rules Committee, which is a hyper-partisan committee, I think there's 8 Democrats to like 3 Republicans, or it's very weighted in favor of Democrats, and the Rules Committee decides what amendments would be in order or not in order. And obviously, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but obviously few, if not any, Republican amendments to this bill were allowed on the floor. And sometimes what the Speaker does is she invokes the rule that allows no amendments on the floor. And so this process, not a single committee saw this bill. This bill was crafted in secret in the Speaker's office, dropped on the floor. I think it was like 1,800 or 2,400 pages that we got days before we actually had the opportunity to vote on it. I don't know about you, but I can't read 1,800 pages in a 48-hour period of time. And then members of Congress don't have the ability to amend it on the floor. And all we get is an up or down vote. And this bill passed, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but I think this only passed by 3 or 4 votes. So you have a huge piece of legislation with all of these very damaging, big, huge issues in them that the membership of the House didn't have the opportunity to work through the legislative process in committee, didn't have the opportunity to amend it on the floor, and only had an up or down vote on the floor, which was I don't think a single, well, I know not a single Republican voted for this bill in the House. And I think there were 2 or 3 Democrats that voted against it in the House. And so now we sit in a circumstance where it goes to the Senate. And hopefully senators like Joe Manchin continue to say that they're going to uphold the filibuster, because if this was a partisan vote, there would be a chance that this awful unconstitutional bill could become law in a 50-50 Senate with the Vice President Harris making the tie break. So hopefully the filibuster, those like Joe Manchin and the senator from Arizona, will hold strong on the filibuster for 60 votes, because there's no way a bill like this gets 60 votes. I would be shocked if a single Republican would vote for this piece of legislation in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely egregious. Fortunately, Senators Rick Scott and Senator Marco Rubio have come out opposing H.R. 1. Unfortunately, the Senate is going through the markup process now. Our biggest concern is that they take these individual pieces of this. You just said 10 really awful things, and there's even worse stuff in there. There's even more bad stuff in the overall package, the 1,800-page bill, that they want to basically, in the Senate, there's an opportunity where they could, try to take off pieces and, move it into multiple different bills. And we just hope our activists who are listening here, you're hearing it directly from Congressman Greg Steube, how crucial it is that you help us fight this issue. It is so incredibly important. The US Senate is where the battleground is. We need to make sure that senators like Joe Manchin hear from each and every single one of you. If you want to be sure, we're going to drop a link in the chat below that is an I volunteer. What that does is you'll fill out some information and you're going to send an email directly to Senator Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema out in Arizona, asking them to make sure that they continue to fight against, in the Senate, S1, but in the House, it was HR 1. So, Congressman, before we let you go, you talked about 10 really important things that were in this bill. What are some other things that you're working on? What are some things that we should be focused on? And how can we continue to help you keep up the good fight?
Well, I'm working on a number of different pieces of legislation, everything from big tech censorship to ensuring that our veterans get quality health care. Big tech is obviously going to be a big issue this election cycle. And I actually think there is an opportunity for bipartisanship on that issue. But unfortunately, the Democrats are not willing to discuss or talk about the liability protection that they get under Section 230. I have a bill that would reform Section 230. It doesn't do away with it. And I think it's important that we don't do away with Section 230, because then sites like Parler and other sites that are trying to emerge as another site that is an alternative to some of these other sites doesn't get crushed in litigation. So my bill creates a market dominant test. So if you're market dominant in the marketplace like Facebook and Twitter and Amazon and Google is, then there would be an ability to have a private right of cause of action if you violated either individuals, businesses, corporations, C4s, First Amendment rights. If you violate their First Amendment rights or you're censoring free speech, then you should be held accountable in a court of law. The reason why that these big tech companies behave in the manner in which they're behaving is because they have liability protection. If you owned a business and you knew that you could do nothing that would end up in court, obviously you would act very differently than if you knew that you could be sued for violating people's First Amendment rights. And that's what's going on. And until we reform and really look at Section 230 and these big tech companies' ability to not have liability because they're protected under Section 230, I don't think you're going to see a change in their behavior. So that's something big that I'm working on. I do think you're going to see some reform in the big tech space, but the way that Democrats want to go after it is very different than the way that Republicans like myself kind of want to attack it by going after the Section 230 liability protections. As far as veterans, I've continued to work hard on ensuring that our veterans have access to the best health care if they're service-connected disabled. And the challenge that we have in our country is in a district like mine. A great example is a district like mine where people have to travel 3 or 4 hours, wait 60 or 90 days to get an appointment to go to a hospital that's could be 4-hour drive from their house for a procedure that could be done very easily in their community. So I have a bill that would allow, it's called the True Choice Bill, it would allow veterans to get TRICARE Prime or TRICARE for life. So that veteran who's service-connected disabled, which means they served our country, they got injured while actively serving our country, would get TRICARE and they could go anywhere they wanted to go to get the health care that they deserve in the community that they live in. I think you would see massive implications to the mental health crisis that we have affecting our veterans right now, because they'd be able to go to a facility right there in their community and not have to wait 60 or 90 days to get an appointment to see a mental health provider at a VA facility and then drive 2 or 3 hours to get there. So I think it would have very strong effects for the care of our veteran, and you would see tax dollars saved dramatically. Instead of those veterans going to a VA system that is a socialized system of healthcare that costs us billions and billions of dollars, they would be going to their community healthcare provider and getting it right there in the community. And I think that would save billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. There's a lot of bills that we filed, but those are 2 big ones that we've been working on. And hopefully at some point we can see that type of legislation pass the House.
Yeah, and we really like that Veterans Peace, Concerned Veterans for America, our sister organization that focuses on veterans' healthcare issues, truly love that bill and really appreciate you championing it and moving the ball forward. And then obviously it's crucial that as we tweak Section 230, that free speech is of the utmost importance. We want to make sure that everybody has the most freedom to be able to speak in today's online forums, et cetera. And I know you do too. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Keep up the great fight in Washington. And we hope to have you back on again soon. And everybody who's tuning in to watch, again, please engage with us on HR1. It is so important that we make sure people understand, one, how important the issue is. A lot of people haven't heard about this issue. While it may be the top priority for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, a lot of people haven't heard about it. So 1, educate your neighbors. 2, take action on our iVolunteer, which is in the comments section below. That way senators can hear from you on how important it is to stop this massive election and just massive federal government overreach type of legislation. Thank you guys for joining. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.